Back now with former Treasury Secretary Jacob Lew in a Fox Business exclusive. We're reacting to what was pretty much a very meaty bombshell, if bombshells can be meaty. What the president just talked about, outlining corporate tax rate that he wants to see. He's with bipartisan members of the House where a budget has to originate. And so as we look forward to loopholes, which you just mentioned, yesterday, Steven Mnuchin, the current Treasury Secretary, said we are going to get rid of this so-called loophole called carried interest, which is lucrative but very controversial. He said he'd get rid of it for hedge funds. But hedge funds aren't really the ones who use it. Charlie Gasparino pointed out private equity uses it way more. It's called welfare for the rich by, of course, the left. But what did you make of that omission?
Well, when I was secretary, we were proposing to eliminate it, and we obviously didn't succeed. So I think getting rid of carried interest would be good tax policy. I think technically Charlie's correct that you have to hold something long enough in order to qualify for carried interest, and a lot of hedge funds don't, so they're not the principal target. I actually think the issue is not just carried interest, it's the broad structure of our tax code, which has really been quite lopsided for many years. I mean, there's discussion now about relaxing the estate tax. The estate tax only hits the very largest estates in this country, $11 million for a couple. That is not your mom and pop business. Getting rid of the estate tax would do the opposite of what the president just said. It would be a big
There's some people, though, who look at it as the government like a vulture showing up at the burial ground for people just as they're going in and they're taking more money. But
Liz, you know how the reason that the tax is so generous to people? Right now, if you inherit something and somebody in your family paid $100 for it and it's worth $1 million, you step up the basis and you never, ever pay taxes on the increase in value. And that is where a lot of wealth in this country is. It's in appreciated assets. So one way or another, in an economy that's increasingly unequal, where that's a source of political and social division in this country, talk about relaxing it is a mistake.
I need to get your betting man hat on. Will we get tax reform by December 31st of this year?
I think December 31st is a very optimistic date, even if you were farther along than we are now. So
will Democrats be on board?
I think the Democrats will have a test of their own. It may be the principles I laid out. It may be their own variant. I can't speak for them. But it depends what the substance is. They'll be on board if the substance reflects principles they can support. I don't think that Democrats are against doing something. They don't want to see tax cuts for wealthy people. They don't want to see a big hole in the deficit. And they want there to be real reform, not just cuts.
Well, maybe we can show that video of the president again. I don't need the sound because I can tell people the president just said the wealthy will not get tax cuts. In fact, they may have to pay a little bit more, so be it. Those were his words. But as we move on, he's been pretty focused on sanctions when it comes to North Korea. Yesterday, the United Nations passed new sanctions. And then, of course, today, a word has come, at least Secretary Mnuchin had said, if China, which of course is the road to North Korea, if China doesn't follow these sanctions, we will put additional sanctions on China, ostensibly Chinese banks, and prevent them from accessing the U.S. and international dollar system. That's quite meaningful, quote, economic warfare works. Does it?
I think that the goal of sanctions is always to be effective in what you're trying to accomplish. The goal here is to put enough pressure on North Korea that they change their policy, that they stop advancing their nuclear program, that it roll it back. That's the goal. Now, how do you do that? You need to have a working relationship with China to put pressure on North Korea. North Korea's aggressive development of its nuclear program is a threat to the United States and the world. So I totally agree that there ought to be maximum pressure. But for maximum pressure to be effective, it has to be working with China and get China went along in the UN. I think that China is the second largest economy in the world, and one has to be conscious of the fact that if you do things that cause major financial institutions in China to have serious problems, if not questions of their survivability, that has potential spillover effects. So one has to be very careful and analytic about how you do this.
I've got like 40 seconds. The U.S. dollar. It is down for the count. It is down 15% against the euro. It's down markedly over the past year, down 10% since January. One of the big names in finance, Jeffrey Gundlach, has said it's overdue for a rally. But other people say it could be headed for a collapse because it's not acting like a reserve currency anymore.
Look, I think
Which is it?
I think that you've seen a number of things going on with regard to the dollar. There were expectations of where the U.S. policy was going that were wildly out of line with what was realistic at the beginning of the year. And then the world settled into a more realistic view. You have economies around the world that are doing better. And I've said for years that, the difference in exchange rates really reflects the difference in the performance of economies. I don't think it's collapsing right now. I predict the future any better than anyone else. But I think that, there has been a response to changing circumstances in the United States and around the world. And I will just say this, I was secretary when the dollar was strong, and I said that I would never trade a strong economy for a weak economy. As the dollar is a little bit softer, it's not bad for U.S. exporters for a while.